Hello and welcome to Sleepsmyth, your peaceful place to unwind, dream, and drift gently into sleep. Before we start our story tonight, let me help you settle in with a simple, calming breath like a gentle lullaby for your body and mind. So, find a cozy spot, maybe snuggle under your blanket, and softly close your eyes. Now, breathing quietly through your nose for 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath softly for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now, slowly exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds, letting all the tension melt away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's do that again. Nice and easy. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. One last time, just like a soft whisper, breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Feel your body getting lighter, your mind quiet, as if you're being tucked gently into a calm, warm bed. Thank you for sharing this moment with Sleepsmyth. Now, relax completely and let the story carry you into a peaceful, restful sleep. Let's begin.
There is a hush that falls over a gallery after the last visitor has gone, when dust motes drift in shafts of fading light, and the air tastes faintly of oil and pigment. In this quiet, paintings breathe differently, as if their varnish and canvas remember more than the world around them. Here in the stillness, each brushstroke, each impasto ridge, and every delicate glaze carries a secret. It is in the eye of the beholder that these secrets awaken, where the careful gaze unravels the layers hidden within color, perspective, and form. Tonight, we will walk among 3 such masterpieces, where composition is not mere decoration but a vessel of histories, coded gestures, and subtle allegories. Each canvas a stage, each figure poised, each object meticulously placed, hiding stories that only patience and attention can reveal. Our first encounter is with Jan van Eyck's The Arnolfini Portrait, a room caught in eternal afternoon, where the convex mirror reflects more than the scene before it, and a Latin inscription quietly claims, Jan van Eyck was here. From the tilt of a hand to the shimmer of a velvet robe, every detail is charged with vows, status, and the subtle geometry of domestic ritual. It is a painting that feels intimate, yet its secrets linger just beyond the reach of the eye. Next, we approach Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. Here, time itself seems suspended along the long table, frozen in a chiaroscuro of betrayal and grace. The gestures of apostles, the angles of their bodies, the delicate division of light across the fresco, all compose a symphony of human emotion. Geometry and perspective guide us subtly, hinting at mysteries embedded in the placement of hands and the architecture of divinity. In its scale and detail, this work becomes a stage for both narrative and enigma. Finally, we turn to Hans Holbein, the Younger's The Ambassadors. Two men of diplomacy and learning stand in a room overflowing with instruments, books, and globes. Yet at their feet, an anamorphic skull warps into view only when seen from a particular angle, a reminder that even knowledge and power bend to mortality. Every object, from lute to celestial sphere, glows with meticulous texture, each brushstroke a cipher, each reflection a challenge to perception. These three masterpieces share a language beyond words: line, color, shadow, and perspective converging to reveal more than the eye can first perceive. Step into their worlds, tracing the layers beneath the surface, discovering the enigmas folded into their forms, where every mirror, every table, every subtle tilt of the head is a doorway. And in this quiet, among pigment and canvas, we are invited not only to see but to linger, to explore, to uncover the hidden stories that have waited centuries for eyes willing to observe. The Arnolfini Portrait, a mirror of secrets and vows. A quiet chamber where a man and woman stand forever bound, beneath a chandelier, before a mirror that reveals more than it should. Merchant of Bruges. In the city of Bruges, when the 15th century was still young, the air carried the smell of wool and spices, of river water and wood smoke. Merchants from distant lands walked its narrow streets, their cloaks brushing against stone walls darkened by years of rain. Horses clattered across cobbles, and guild halls shone with banners of trade, each thread a symbol of power and pride. This was no sleepy corner of Europe, but a crossroads, a place where money and faith intertwined, and where beauty itself was turned into currency. Amid this rising tide of wealth and commerce lived a man whose eye was sharper than most. Jan van Eyck, a painter whose brush seemed less like a tool and more like an instrument of alchemy. Born in the closing years of the 14th century, he came of age when art was changing, breaking away from stiff forms and flat surfaces, daring to catch the shimmer of light, the gleam of metal, the weight of velvet and fur. His world was one of pigment ground from precious stones, of oils blended in secret recipes, of apprentices whispering over wooden panels that held the promise of eternity. Van Eyck served as a court painter to dukes and nobles, a man trusted not just with portraits but with diplomacy. He was no mere craftsman but a figure moving through corridors of influence, carrying both brush and sealed letter. In his hands, art became not just depiction, but revelation. His paintings did not merely show faces, they unveiled souls. They caught the way light curved across a cheek, the way fingers folded in stillness, the way gold could gleam as if lit from within. In this era, Bruges was a treasury of silk and silver, a city whose wealth echoed in its churches and counting houses. To walk its streets was to hear Latin prayers, Italian bargains, French laughter, and the guttural syllables of Flemish tongues. It was in this mixture of wealth, language, and belief that Jan van Eyck painted, a place where every corner whispered of trade and devotion. And it was in this city, beneath its spires and bells, that one day, in the year 1434, he would sign his name on a panel that seemed to stop time itself. The world he captured was one in flux. Old ways of painting still lingered, flat and gilded, sacred and distant. But Van Eyck dared to bring viewers closer, to make them feel as if they could step into the room, hear the hushed breath, feel the polished wood beneath their hands. His oils allowed for transparency, for glazes that shimmered like light across water, for depth that gave even the smallest pearl a weight of its own. Thus, when he took up the commission to paint Giovanni di Niccolao Arnolfini, an Italian merchant settled in Bruges, and the woman who stood beside him, he brought not only his craft but the full measure of his vision. It was more than a portrait. It was a statement, a story, a mystery set into oak, a union of merchant wealth and painterly genius, sealed in color and line. And though centuries would pass, though kings and wars and revolutions would rise and fall, that room would remain intact upon the panel, eternal as the vows it seemed to guard. As night falls, we linger on this beginning, a city of wealth, a painter of unmatched skill, and the quiet stirrings of a masterpiece yet to be revealed. The room is not yet lit, the mirror not yet filled, but soon it will open, and in it we will see more than a likeness, we will see a world. A chamber prepared. Giovanni di Niccolao Arnolfini was a man of Florence, a merchant who had carried his fortune northward, following the threads of trade that bound Italy to Flanders. He dealt in silk, in luxury, in goods that shimmered as they passed through careful hands. In Bruges, he found a city ready to welcome his wealth, a city where Italian bankers and Flemish merchants met at the tables of commerce, raising goblets of wine as they sealed agreements in half a dozen tongues. He was not noble, yet wealth made him powerful, and power made him visible. For men such as Arnolfini, art was not simply decoration, it was declaration. So it was that he turned to Jan van Eyck, the most celebrated painter of his time, to immortalize not only his likeness but his station. In the year 1434, the two men stood within a chamber paneled in wood, its bed draped in scarlet, its chandelier glinting in muted light. Here, amid oranges resting upon a chest, a small dog curled on the floorboards, and a convex mirror hanging at the center of the wall, the painter began to compose a moment that would outlive its subjects. The woman who stands beside Giovanni is still the subject of debate. Many have said she was his wife, perhaps Giovanna Senemi, though records tell us their marriage occurred after the date inscribed upon the panel. Others argue she may be Constanza Trenta, another name tied to Giovanni. Her life ended too soon, leaving the portrait not of a wedding but of remembrance. Whatever her true identity, Van Eyck dressed her in heavy green fabric lined with fur, a gown that seemed to pool like a small meadow at her feet. Her hands rest against her stomach, not in fullness but in gesture, a sign of fertility, of continuity, of what may one day be. Van Eyck did not simply paint what was there. He arranged symbols as carefully as a merchant lays out wares. The fruit upon the chest, oranges brought north at great expense, spoke of wealth and abundance. The dog, loyal and alert, became an emblem of fidelity. The sandals cast aside on the floor hinted at holy ground, at vows spoken not just between man and woman but before God himself. The single candle burning in the chandelier, despite the daylight entering through the window, suggested the divine presence, eternal and watchful. In the center of it all, Giovanni raises his right hand as if taking an oath, his left hand clasping hers in a bond both solemn and tender. This is no stiff display of portraiture, but a captured ritual, a moment that balances between public record and private vow. Behind them, the convex mirror curves the world inward, showing not only the backs of the couple but two other figures, one of whom may be the painter himself. And above that mirror, scratched into the very paint, are the words, Johannes de Eyck fut hic, Jan van Eyck was here. A statement both of authorship and of presence, as though he stood not behind the easel but within the room itself. The painting was no ordinary commission. It was a testament to a life of prosperity, a union made visible, and a reminder that art could speak beyond its frame. For Giovanni, it was a mark of his standing, his connections, his ability to summon the greatest artist of the time into his service. For Van Eyck, it was an opportunity to stretch the very limits of what painting could be. He gave wood and pigment the power to suggest touch, scent, warmth, a room that breathes though sealed beneath varnish. Thus the portrait came into being, not merely as likeness but as narrative, not only as representation but as myth in the making. A merchant and his bride, a painter and his craft, a chamber filled with detail that turns to symbol, and a date written as though to bind time itself. From this commission grew a work that would outlast its patrons, its artist, even the city that gave it birth. And tonight, as we stand before it in thought, we sense that the vows are still unfolding. The candle still burns. The fruit still gleams. The mirror still holds its secrets. All suspended, as if eternity itself agreed to pause within this painted room. Fruit, flame, and faith. Step closer, and the world falls away. The noise of the marketplace, the creak of wagons, the toll of bells fades into silence, until only this room remains. A chamber enclosed in wood and stone, filled with a light that is neither too sharp nor too dim. It is a gentle Flemish light, sifting through a window, touching fabrics, gleaming across glass, and finding its way onto the quiet faces of those who stand here. At first glance, it seems simple. A man and a woman, side by side, not moving, not speaking. Their eyes avoid ours, yet we feel their awareness, as though they know they are being observed, even centuries after they once stood together. Giovanni Arnolfini in his dark robes trimmed with fur, solemn and dignified, his hand raised, caught between greeting and oath. The woman beside him draped in folds of green so heavy they spread outward, a small cascade of fabric gathered around her feet. Her head lowered slightly, her gaze soft, her hand resting gently in his. Two figures, still as statues, and yet we sense the quiet rhythm of breath, the presence of life paused but not extinguished. Around them, the room itself seems to lean inward, details arranged like participants in this moment. A bed carved in rich wood, its canopy heavy with deep red fabric. A brass chandelier hanging above, its single candle still burning despite the daylight, flame steady, unmoved by time. A small spaniel at their feet, its fur rendered so delicately that one could almost reach out and feel the softness of it. The wooden floorboards beneath them, slightly uneven, each groove painted with precision, as if every plank had its own history to tell. To the left, the window glows with the presence of fruit, oranges, rare and costly in this northern land, their skins catching the light like miniature suns. On the wall opposite the bed hangs a small round mirror, polished and convex, drawing the room into its curved surface. Around its edges, tiny scenes of Christ's Passion unfold, each one rendered with the patience of a hand devoted to detail beyond measure. Above that mirror, in careful script, the words in Latin, Jan van Eyck was here. A signature unlike any other, not at the bottom, not hidden in flourish, but boldly written in the very heart of the scene, as if the painter declares himself not only the maker but a witness. The stillness of the couple holds attention. Are they bride and groom, standing in the moment of betrothal? Are they already husband and wife, their portrait a display of wealth and devotion? Or are they perhaps more than that, a symbol, an allegory of union and prosperity? The answers remain just out of reach, and so the silence deepens, inviting us to linger, to look again. Everything in this chamber feels deliberate. The discarded shoes near the bed, the small rosary hanging by the mirror, the carved finial of Saint Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, crowning the bedpost. Even the folds of fabric and the gleam of glass seem to speak in a language half hidden, one we are asked not to decipher quickly but to dwell upon slowly. This first encounter with the portrait does not reveal all. Instead, it plants a question in the heart. Who are these two, frozen in gesture? What covenant is being enacted here? Why does the painter step so boldly into the scene with his own presence, written upon the wall? And so we linger at the threshold of the painting, half inside its world, half outside, as though standing in a doorway between centuries. The chamber holds its stillness, and the couple remains as they were on that day in the 15th century. The candle burns, the fruit gleams, the small dog rests, and the mirror reflects more than the eye can see. Circle of glass. Stay a little longer in the chamber, and the stillness begins to shift. What at first seemed ordinary becomes extraordinary, and what seemed clear turns layered with meaning. The Arnolfini portrait is not a simple record of two figures standing in a room. It is a woven fabric of symbols, each chosen with care, each glowing with a quiet significance that carries us further into its mystery. Look first at the dog, standing at their feet. A small creature, fur brushed with delicate strokes, its eyes bright as though caught in mid-glance. To some, it is no more than a pet, but in the language of the time, it was more than that. Dogs stood for loyalty, for faithfulness, for bonds that endure beyond ceremony. Its presence between man and woman suggests trust, a reminder that companionship, not only contract, forms the foundation of a union. Turn then to the fruit, the oranges that rest upon the chest beneath the window, and the one placed carefully on the windowsill. These are no common fruits in Bruges. They were luxuries, costly treasures carried across seas from warmer lands. To display them was to announce prosperity, to speak silently of wealth gathered from trade and daring voyages. Yet fruit also carried other meanings. Oranges, round and glistening, could hint at innocence lost, at the fall of man, at the garden of beginnings that forever lingers in human memory. In their golden glow rests both prosperity and a reminder of fragility. The woman's gesture, hand resting gently against the curve of her gown, speaks too. Some have said it shows pregnancy, but closer thought suggests otherwise. It is a gesture of potential, of hope for fertility, of the promise of continuation. Her gown, heavy with folds and lined with fur, envelopes her as though protecting that possibility. Nearby, the carved bedpost holds the figure of Saint Margaret, guardian of childbirth, watching quietly from her place of wood and polish. The chamber whispers of family yet to come, of lives not yet lived but already anticipated in fabric, in symbol, in wood. The man's raised hand stands opposite her gesture, palm outward, as if declaring or swearing. It is the sign of oath, of contract, of promise spoken aloud. His stance, firm and straight, complements her softness, together forming a balance of strength and gentleness, of declaration and reception. Between them, their joined hands seal the moment, neither fully public nor entirely private, but something in between, a bond both earthly and spiritual. Above their heads hangs the chandelier, metal gleaming, arms curved in symmetry, yet only one candle lit. Why burn a flame in daylight? To some, it was a sign of God's eternal eye, watching even in the brightest hours. A reminder that vows were not only witnessed by human eyes, but by a divine presence that could not be extinguished by time. That single flame, poised above them, becomes like a star in the chamber, steady and eternal. And then there is the mirror, round, convex, curving the world into its glassy depth. In it, we see not only the backs of the couple but two more figures standing at the doorway, as if the painting itself acknowledges witnesses unseen. Some say one is Van Eyck himself, painting his own presence into the story, the other perhaps a companion or guarantor of the event. Around the mirror's frame are tiny scenes of Christ's Passion, each one painted so delicately they seem like visions glimpsed from a distance. The mirror does not only reflect, it expands, turning a private room into a stage upon which heaven and earth both appear. And then just above, written upon the plaster as though carved into the very air of the room, the words, Jan van Eyck was here. Not a signature tucked away in modest script, but a bold declaration, asserting that the painter stood in this chamber, present and witness, his hand not only recording but joining the moment. It is as though Van Eyck himself has stepped inside, leaving behind not only paint but presence, an eternal claim that he too belonged in this secret scene. Thus the painting unfolds. A dog that speaks of loyalty, fruit that glows with wealth and fragility, gestures that bind and promise, a candle that burns for eternity, a mirror that draws in both heaven and men, and words that make the painter forever present. Layers upon layers, symbols upon symbols, each detail quietly demanding attention, each object a doorway into meaning. The chamber is no longer still. It is alive with signs. A portrait becomes a text, a room becomes a world, and we standing here are no longer mere observers but participants in its deciphering. Alchemy of oil. Pause before the painted chamber and let your eyes wander. Each fold of fabric, each strand of hair, each gleam of brass seems so alive that one forgets it was born from pigments, brushes, and oil. Jan van Eyck's hand moves invisibly across the panel, his presence not only in the bold inscription above the mirror, but in every glimmering detail, every delicate glaze layered upon wood. To understand the portrait, one must also understand the craft, for Van Eyck was not only painter but magician, conjuring depth and light from humble earth and oil. Before his time, much of painting remained bound by tempera, colors mixed with egg yolk, quick drying, luminous but fragile. Such a medium allowed for brilliance but not softness, for clarity but not depth. Faces seemed stiff, garments hard, light scattered without tenderness. Van Eyck, however, turned to oils, blending pigments with linseed and walnut, discovering the secret of transparency. With oil, he could build layer upon layer, each thin as breath, until color glowed from within like sunlight caught in water. Surfaces shone, shadows deepened, and the world seemed no longer flat but dimensional, tangible, near. Look at Giovanni's fur-lined robe. Each strand rendered with strokes so fine they seem plucked from life itself. The weight of it presses upon his shoulders, heavy yet soft, a garment not only painted but felt. Or the woman's green gown, folds cascading like waves of fabric, the texture both rich and supple, the fur edging catching light as though brushed by unseen fingers. The wood of the bed gleams with polish, its carvings sharp and defined. The brass of the chandelier reflects the daylight with a muted warmth, the kind of glow that cannot be invented but only observed with an eye that misses nothing. And then, the mirror, a marvel within a marvel. Its curved surface not only reflects but refracts, bending the chamber into its tiny circle. In it, the backs of the couple appear, smaller yet still vivid, and the two additional figures stand as though invited to step within. Such mastery of reflection was not a trick, but a triumph of vision and patience. With brushes no larger than a breath, Van Eyck traced a world within a world, a second chamber hidden inside the first. Even the inscriptions themselves are works of art. Johannes de Eyck Fut Hic, each letter painted with steady care, as if written by quill, though formed in pigment upon wood. It stands not as a flourish at the edge, but as a central element, daringly bold. The painter does not hide behind his craft, but steps into it, claiming his space within the scene he created. What Van Eyck achieved was more than likeness. He achieved presence. To gaze upon the Arnolfini portrait is to feel as though the figures breathe in the silence, as though the dog may shift its stance at any moment, as though the candle flame trembles against a draught we cannot feel. This illusion was not accident but design, born from oils mastered, from vision sharpened, from hands steady as time itself. Contemporaries spoke of him in awe, some even whispering that he had discovered secrets known only to the ancients. His paintings were called windows into truth, revelations more than representations. To those who saw them for the first time, they seemed less like painted surfaces and more like captured reality, as though the panel itself had become transparent glass through which one glimpsed another world. And so, Van Eyck's hand lingers not only in the objects and figures, but in the very sensation of being present. He reminds us that art is not merely depiction but transformation. That wood and pigment, in skilled hands, can become chamber, vow, presence, eternity. And tonight, as we linger before the portrait, we feel his hand guiding ours, drawing our gaze to fabric, to light, to mirror to word, to the illusion that makes reality itself seem fragile by comparison. Vows or memorial. For nearly 6 centuries, the Arnolfini portrait has been more than a work of art. It has been a riddle hung upon a wall, a scene that invites questions yet resists answers. Stand before it long enough, and one begins to feel that nothing is certain, that every detail may conceal a secret, that the silence of the chamber is filled not with emptiness but with debate that spans generations. The first question has always been, what moment does this painting truly show? At first glance, it seems to capture a marriage. Giovanni Arnolfini raising his hand, the woman's hand placed gently in his, the single candle above, the dog at their feet, all arranged as if to seal a vow. Yet records tell us that Giovanni married Giovanna Senemi in the year 1434, and still, some scholars insist the timeline does not match. Others suggest it may not be a wedding at all, but a betrothal, a solemn promise made before the final ceremony. And then there are those who say it is not contract nor celebration, but commemoration, that the woman may not have lived to see this moment, and what we witness is both portrait and memorial. Another mystery lies in the mirror. Its convex surface reflects 2 additional figures, one of whom may well be Jan van Eyck himself. Was the painter simply recording his presence, or was he declaring himself a witness, standing in the place of a notary, confirming the vows with his hand and his art? If so, the painting becomes not only a record of likeness but a legal document, an oath inscribed in paint instead of ink. And yet, certainty slips away, for no written contract survives, no record tells us the painter's true intent. The gestures, too, invite endless debate. Giovanni's raised hand, is it blessing or oath? The woman's lowered gaze, is it modesty, obedience, or a deeper signal of fertility? Even the placement of their feet, the discarded shoes near the bed, the rosary hanging by the mirror, all have been interpreted in a dozen ways, each possible, none proven. And then there is the inscription itself. Jan van Eyck was here. Why here, and not at the edge of the frame? Some have read it as proof that the artist stood in the very room, that this is not invention but record, that he wrote himself into the story as witness. Others see it as bold self-assertion, a claim that art itself could rival presence, that to paint was to exist forever. Still others whisper that the words hint at Van Eyck's role not only as artist but as participant, a suggestion that he was more deeply entangled in the event than we can ever know. Even the fruit carries uncertainty. Are the oranges symbols of innocence, prosperity, or paradise lost? Or are they simply fruit, rendered with care because they were there on the day the painter stood before his patrons? Each answer dissolves as quickly as it is formed, leaving behind the unease that perhaps every object is more than itself, that nothing in the portrait is accidental. Over centuries, writers have woven their own stories into the painting. Some imagined secret pregnancies, hidden codes, clandestine rites. Others looked into the convex mirror and claimed it reveals truths too subtle for the casual eye. And in modern times, the painting has been placed among lists of enigmas, alongside manuscripts undeciphered and relics unexplained. It is both document and dream, proof and puzzle, art and enigma. And so the Arnolfini portrait remains what it has always been, a chamber where certainty slips away. We stand before it, eyes searching for answers, yet the room offers only further questions. The man and woman remain silent, the mirror continues to curve reality, the candle burns steadily, and the painter's bold words remain etched into plaster. Jan van Eyck was here. But what he meant, what he wished us to see, that is the secret that time has never surrendered. From Bruges to London, art is born in silence, but it rarely remains there. Once the final brushstroke has dried, a painting begins its own life, drifting from hand to hand, from wall to wall, carrying with it not only beauty but the weight of history. The Arnolfini portrait is no exception. Painted in Bruges in the early 15th century, it began as a private commission, a treasure for the wealthy merchant Giovanni di Niccolao Arnolfini, whose dealings tied him to the courts of Burgundy and the fortunes of commerce. Yet the portrait would not remain bound to one family alone. Its path would stretch across centuries, across shifting empires, into palaces and galleries, until it reached the place where countless visitors now stand before it. For many years, the painting remained in the Low Countries, guarded as a jewel of Van Eyck's legacy. Its presence was noted in inventories, admired in circles that revered Van Eyck as a master of detail beyond compare. Then, as dynasties rose and fell, the portrait passed into Spanish hands, becoming part of the collection of the Habsburgs. Within their palaces it hung, admired by kings and courtiers, its candle still alight, its mirror still reflecting a world long gone yet strangely present. During this period, artists and scholars marveled at Van Eyck's achievement. Some copied its forms, others studied its layers, many attempted to learn the secret of his oils. Yet still the portrait remained intact, carefully preserved, while other works succumbed to war, weather, or neglect. The Arnolfini couple remained untouched, their vows still frozen in time, as though they too resisted the centuries. But history is never still. In the wake of empire, the portrait crossed borders once more, making its way into the hands of collectors who sought prestige through art. By the 19th century, it had found its way to England, where a growing fascination with the old masters transformed London into a haven for such treasures. At last, in 1842, the painting entered the collection of the National Gallery, a public institution that offered to all what had once been reserved for the few. Since then, countless eyes have met the gaze of Giovanni and his wife. Scholars have studied, tourists have lingered, artists have drawn inspiration. The couple has become silent hosts to generations of dreamers, each bringing their own questions to the quiet room where the portrait now hangs. Its wooden panel rests securely behind glass, its colors carefully guarded, its secrets preserved for centuries yet to come. What is striking, perhaps, is not only that the painting survived, but that it continues to feel immediate, as though 600 years had been no more than a pause. Unlike many works that fade, its pigments remain vivid, its textures sharp. The green gown still folds with weight, the fur still glimmers with softness, the brass still gleams with reflected light. The passage of time, though it carried the panel across kingdoms, has not dimmed the presence within. One might imagine the painting whispering of the journeys it has seen. Carried through candlelit halls of Bruges, admired by courtiers in Madrid, watched by nobles in Vienna, crated and shipped across seas, unwrapped beneath the smoky skies of 19th century London. Each setting a different stage, yet always the same figures standing silently, unchanged. As it hangs in the National Gallery, the Arnolfini portrait belongs to the world. No longer locked in a merchant's chamber, no longer hidden in royal collections, it greets thousands who wander the galleries, their footsteps soft upon polished floors. They pause, they lean close, they marvel at the mirror, the dog, the candle. And though they leave, the portrait remains, patient, unyielding, eternal. Thus the journey ends not in secrecy, but in openness. A chamber once private has become public. A vow once whispered in paint has become part of human memory. The Arnolfini portrait rests, yet its story continues, for each who gazes upon it carries away some fragment, some question, some sense that art, like life, is a voyage across time. Immortal vow. When the gallery lights dim and the footsteps fade, the Arnolfini portrait remains, silent yet alive. 6 centuries have passed since Jan van Eyck's brush laid its final stroke, and still the couple stands together in their painted chamber. They do not age, they do not change, they do not speak, yet they continue to draw us in, as though the centuries between us and them have dissolved into mist. What makes this portrait endure is not only its mastery, though Van Eyck's skill remains astonishing. It is not only its symbolism, though the room overflows with meaning. It is not only its mystery, though questions hover around it like unseen stars. What makes it endure is the way it joins all these things into a single vision, a single moment suspended in time. We do not look at Giovanni and his wife as we look at distant history. We look at them as though we have just stepped into the room, as though their lives are unfolding before us, as though we are part of their story. For some, the portrait is proof of love, a glimpse of tenderness in an age so far from our own. For others, it is a puzzle, a work that resists answers yet rewards curiosity. For artists, it is a lesson in craft, a reminder that the brush can make pigment breathe, that a mirror can hold entire worlds. For dreamers, it is a window into a past that is not gone but present, a reminder that time is not always linear, that some moments are eternal. Consider how often it has been studied, copied, written about. Entire books devoted to its gestures, entire lectures dedicated to its fruit, entire theories spun from its mirror. And yet, despite all the words, the portrait keeps its silence. It yields just enough to keep us close, but never enough to let us walk away satisfied. Like a riddle that resists solution, it compels us to return, to gaze again, to wonder once more. And perhaps this is why it is so fitting that Jan van Eyck signed it not as painter, but as presence. Jan van Eyck was here. He was here in the room, in the moment, in the panel. And in a way, he remains here still. Every visitor who leans in close, every student who sketches its forms, every dreamer who pauses before the mirror, they too stand in that room with him. Across centuries, across languages, across lives, we join the painter, the couple, the little dog, and the flickering flame. The chamber becomes timeless, the vow becomes universal, the art becomes eternal. In the quiet of the gallery, it is easy to imagine the figures shifting slightly. The woman adjusting her gown, Giovanni lowering his raised hand, the dog stirring from its patient stance. Easy to imagine the candle flame flickering against a draft we cannot feel, the mirror catching our own reflection if only we could step inside. The painting blurs the line between reality and illusion, and in that blur, it finds its power. So the Arnolfini portrait remains what it has always been, not simply a likeness, not merely a document, not just a masterpiece. It is a presence, an encounter, a dream made visible. It endures because it is more than an object on a wall. It is a living moment, forever suspended, forever inviting us to enter, to wonder, to lose ourselves in its mysteries. And tonight, as we leave the chamber in our minds, we carry its stillness with us. The green gown, the fur-trimmed robe, the gleaming mirror, the silent figures. They follow us into the dark, not as puzzles demanding answers, but as companions to our dreams. Jan van Eyck was here. And now so are we. The Last Supper, geometry of betrayal and grace. An image where symmetry cradles turmoil, and the tale of beauty and treachery unfolds through the language of hands and eyes. The Maestro in Milan. In the city of Milan, during the late 15th century, a man of restless genius walked among courtiers, soldiers, and scholars. His name was Leonardo da Vinci, and though he had trained as a painter in Florence, his mind refused the boundaries of a single craft. He was engineer and dreamer, anatomist and architect, musician and philosopher. A man who filled his notebooks with flying machines, turbulent waters, and designs for cities that could breathe. In his presence, even the ordinary seemed touched by wonder, for he was not simply an artist but a maestro, a conductor of visions that bridged heaven and earth. Milan at that time was ruled by Ludovico Sforza, called Il Moro, a duke who wished to transform his court into a beacon of power and culture. The city was alive with ambition, its walls thick with fortress strength, its halls glittering with displays of wealth and influence. Yet Ludovico, ever aware of the rivalry among Italian states, knew that stone and steel were not enough to secure his legacy. He needed art, monumental, enduring, and unlike anything his rivals could boast. And in Leonardo, he found both a servant and a star. Leonardo entered Ludovico's service not simply as a painter, but as a man of many trades. He offered himself as a military engineer, proposing catapults and fortifications. He played music, designed costumes, and crafted intricate pageants that dazzled the court. And yet, behind these varied duties, His true hunger was for the canvas, for the chance to give form to mysteries too deep for words. It was here, in the halls of Milan, that his opportunity arrived. The Dominican friars of Santa Maria del Grazie sought a painter to adorn their refectory, the dining hall where monks gathered for their daily meals. To Ludovico, this was not just a pious act but a statement, an alliance of ducal power and sacred devotion. And so he appointed his court artist, Leonardo, to the task. But what Leonardo conceived was not a simple decoration, not a scene to glance upon and forget. It was to be a vision so vast and human, so meticulously balanced and yet alive, that centuries later, it would still leave us breathless. Imagine Leonardo at his easel, sketchbooks open, charcoal smudging his fingers. He studied the apostles not as saints frozen in time, but as men caught in a storm of emotion. He tested their poses, their hands raised in protest, their brows furrowed in grief, their mouths open in disbelief. He studied faces on the streets of Milan, capturing in quick strokes the fleeting expressions of merchants, beggars, soldiers, scholars. For in his eyes, the divine was revealed not in abstraction, but in the raw pulse of human reaction. Yet Leonardo was not a man of haste. The friars grew impatient, for weeks would pass while the wall remained bare, while Leonardo paced, measured, and dreamed. He painted in thought before he painted in pigment, searching for the harmony of a moment where heaven and earth would meet. It was said he would stand for hours, brush in hand, unmoving, as though waiting for the vision itself to speak. And when at last he touched the wall, he did so not with the practiced repetition of a craftsman, but with the reverence of one who believed he was setting eternity into stone. Thus in Milan, under the gaze of a duke who sought glory and in the service of friars who sought devotion, Leonardo prepared himself to give the world not merely a painting, but a revelation. The Last Supper was to be no ornament, no background to a meal. It would be a drama carved into the very breath of the room, a scene where betrayal and grace, sorrow and silence, eternity and human frailty would dwell side by side. And so the maestro began. Banquet for Eternity. The refectory of Santa Maria del Grazie was a solemn space. Long and echoing, its walls bathed in soft light, its tables lined for monks who ate in silence, broken only by the cadence of prayers. Here the Dominican friars gathered day after day, their meals a reminder of humility, their eyes often lifted to images of devotion painted on plaster. It was this room that Duke Ludovico Sforza wished to transform, to endow with a vision that would outlast his reign, a vision of faith woven with his patronage. For what better way to bind his name to eternity than to place it upon the wall of a sacred house, in a feast that would never end? Leonardo da Vinci was given the task, but he was never a man to follow tradition blindly. Others might have painted the familiar scene of the Last Supper as a simple gathering, Christ calm at the center, the apostles arranged without much care. But Leonardo sought not the ordinary, not the expected. He longed to capture the instant when peace gave way to turmoil, the very moment when Christ revealed, "One of you will betray me." This was the spark he chose, not stillness, but the sudden shattering of it, the ripple of shock and sorrow spreading outward like a stone cast into water. Imagine the wall before him, a vast blankness, 29 feet wide, awaiting his hand. Leonardo did not see empty plaster, but a banquet hall waiting to open, a table stretching not only for monks of Milan, but for all who would come after. He envisioned a supper that would never truly end, where the faithful and the curious alike would sit in spirit among Christ and his companions. The Duke, eager for magnificence, approved of the scale. Yet what Leonardo conceived went beyond ducal pride, beyond ecclesiastical piety. It was, in essence, a work for the ages, a banquet for eternity. For he understood that a refectory painting was not just decoration, but a mirror of ritual. The friars who ate in that hall would sit, as if at the same table as the apostles, partaking in their daily bread beneath the eternal bread broken above. The earthly meal and the sacred meal would become one. And so the scaffolds were raised, and Leonardo prepared the wall. Not with the quick strokes of fresco, which demanded speed and rigid discipline, but with an experimental method of his own. He sought to work at his pace, to blend colors and textures as he would on wood or canvas. To him, the wall was not stone, but living surface, a stage upon which men and divinity would meet. Though this daring choice would one day endanger the painting's survival, in its birth it gave him freedom to linger, to refine, to dream until each figure breathed. The monks may have grown restless, watching the maestro pause for days, staring at the wall in silence. The Duke may have wondered if the painting would ever be finished. Yet Leonardo was not fashioning an image to please impatience. He was summoning a vision meant to outlast all who demanded it. And when his design began to take shape, what emerged was no ordinary feast, but a moment held forever, a gathering caught between betrayal and grace, sorrow and divinity. A supper that, once unveiled, would never fade from the memory of humankind. It was not simply a decoration. It was a banquet for eternity. Revelation at the table. Step closer now. Imagine the refectory doors opening, and before you stretches a wall transformed into another world. The hall recedes, and you are no longer in Milan, no longer among friars and silence. You are seated at a table in Jerusalem, where time has stopped in the instant of revelation. At the center, Christ sits calm, his form steady amid the storm, hands stretched toward bread and wine, the elements of sacrifice and grace. His figure is a quiet axis, a triangle of serenity against the rush of human turmoil. He does not reach for silver, nor raise his voice, but allows the truth to hang heavy in the air. One of you will betray me. And from this single sentence, a tempest of emotion ripples outward. The apostles do not sit still, as in paintings before. They rise, they lean, they argue, their bodies twisting and turning as though the room itself has tilted under the weight of the words. Their faces are alive, each one captured at the height of shock or protest. Andrew lifts his hands in alarm, palms open in disbelief. James the Greater spreads his arms wide as though trying to contain the chaos. Thomas raises a finger, pointing toward heaven, foreshadowing his future doubt. Philip presses his hands to his chest, as if to plead his innocence. And then, at Christ's side, Peter leans forward, fierce and protective, while Judas recoils into shadow, his hand clutching the purse of silver. No crown marks his guilt, no flame brands his betrayal. Instead, his face is lowered, his eyes cast aside, his body shrinking from the light. Yet his hand reaches forward toward the same bowl as Christ's, a gesture small but unmistakable, the sign of treachery caught in plain sight. The table stretches across the wall, not as a barrier, but as a bridge. Bread lies broken, wine cups are scattered, dishes gleam with the humble simplicity of a shared meal. It feels both sacred and familiar, a supper of heaven made real in the details of earth. You can almost hear the voices, the rustle of garments, the sudden scraping of chairs as the apostles shift in disbelief. Look upward, and the ceiling of the painted room extends the space, with beams of perspective drawing your eye to the vanishing point just behind Christ's head. The painted windows open onto an imagined landscape, calm and serene, as though the world outside remains untouched by the storm within. Light filters through, framing Christ in a glow that is both natural and transcendent. It is here, at first glance, that the genius of Leonardo's vision becomes clear. He has not painted saints locked in solemnity, but men caught in a human storm, their emotions raw, their bodies alive. This is not a frozen icon, but a living moment. The table becomes ours, the whole becomes theirs, and the boundary between centuries dissolves. This is the revelation at the table. Not only that one would betray, but that in this instant, humanity itself is unveiled, its fear, its doubt, its loyalty, its love. And at the center, unshaken, is Christ, calm as geometry, steady as eternity. Hands that betray, eyes that tremble. Linger here, not on the whole wall, but on the fragments, the smallest details that hold the greatest weight. For in Leonardo's vision, truth is not declared by banners or words, but by the silent language of hands and eyes. See how the apostles move, their hands alive with speech. Andrew thrusts his palms outward, as though to say, "Surely not I." James throws his arms wide, the folds of his cloak stretching like sails in sudden wind. Thomas, forever marked by doubt, raises a single finger, poised like a question that will echo long after this supper ends. Each hand is a thought, each gesture a cry, a defense, a plea. Christ at the center spreads his arms upon the table, palms downward, open to bread and wine. It is a gesture of surrender and offering, a calm acceptance of what must come. No drama in his eyes, no violence in his body, only stillness, the gravity of one who already carries the burden of the cross. Around him the storm swirls, but he remains the eye of it, steady as stone. And then Judas. He does not shout, does not strike a pose. Instead, he leans back, his face turned away, his hand curled around the purse of silver. His body shrinks from the light, his shadow thick against the table. Yet watch closely, for his hand reaches the same bowl as Christ's, a detail so small that one might miss it, yet enough to seal his fate in the story. A hand among hands, a gesture that betrays without a word. The eyes speak too, John's head bows. His face softened in sorrow, his eyes lowered as if already grieving the loss. Peter's gaze burns, sharp with fury and devotion, his hand clutching a knife that rests upon the table, a foreshadowing of violence in the garden. Matthew turns in surprise towards Simon and Thaddeus, his eyes wide, his lips parting as though mid-question. And Judas, again Judas, does not meet Christ's gaze, does not seek defense or denial. His eyes, cast aside, betray more than his hand ever could. This is the genius of Leonardo. He does not need halos or inscriptions to mark who is who, or to declare their virtue and sin. Instead, he trusts the human body, its hands, its eyes, its restless movement, to carry the truth. He paints not saints beyond our reach, but men in the throes of shock and fear, men whose gestures we might see at any crowded table, in any heated quarrel. And so the supper becomes alive not in the food upon the table, but in the trembling of hands and the searching of eyes. We, the viewers, become witnesses, not to a distant sacred myth, but to a moment of raw humanity, where betrayal hides among gestures, and grace shines quietly in open palms. In this storm of motion, the revelation is not in words, but in what the hands declare and the eyes cannot hide. The architecture of divinity. Step back now. Let the rush of gestures and the heat of eyes dissolve into something larger. For beyond the storm of men, there is a structure, a hidden order that holds the chaos together. This is Leonardo's hand at its most deliberate, his vision not only of a supper but of a universe composed in lines and light. At the center sits Christ, his figure calm, his arms stretched wide. Around him, the apostles twist and rise, their bodies alive in movement, but he remains a still point, a triangle of serenity. His head is framed by the vanishing point, where every line of the ceiling, every beam of the painted architecture, converges in harmony. Even the light from the painted windows pours toward him, crowning him not with gold or jewels, but with geometry itself. The room stretches behind the figures, not flat, but deep, as though the wall has dissolved into an endless chamber. 3 windows open upon a quiet landscape, a painted horizon of rolling hills and clear sky. They are not simply decoration, they are symbols of eternity, openings beyond the world of betrayal and sorrow. 3 windows, 3 arches, 3 echoes of the divine, framing Christ in Trinity and balance. Notice the groups of apostles, arranged not in disorder, but in deliberate clusters of 3. 4 groups, each triad woven with motion, conversation, alarm. 12 men divided into harmonious sets, circling the one who is both center and anchor. It is chaos woven into order, turmoil made to obey the laws of design. Leonardo was not content with mere likeness. He built the supper upon principles that governed both art and nature. Perspective, proportion, symmetry. These were not tricks of paint, but revelations of how the world itself was structured. To him, divinity was not only in faces and stories, but in the laws that shaped rivers and stars, music and mathematics. And here, in this painted hall, he gave those laws their most sacred expression. The ceiling beams march in steady rhythm, their lines pulling our gaze ever inward. The walls of the painted room recede with flawless depth, a stage designed for eternity. Even the table, long, simple, stretched across the foreground, is no accident. It is a bridge, joining our world to theirs, inviting us to sit as silent witnesses at the banquet. Christ himself is geometry incarnate. his form a perfect triangle, his body still and harmonious against the swirl of motion. His head, the vanishing point of the entire composition, is the quiet anchor of the storm. Here, art and theology meet, order drawn from chaos, divinity rising from humanity, eternity fixed in a moment. This is the architecture of divinity, not bricks and mortar, but perspective and proportion, light and balance. A cathedral not built in stone, but in paint. And in this structure, Leonardo has given us not only a supper, but a vision of the universe itself, a world where beauty frames betrayal, and grace is measured in lines that never fade. Enigmas between the lines. For centuries, scholars and dreamers have stood before the Last Supper, convinced that Leonardo left more than paint upon plaster, that within the gestures, the spaces, the lines of the composition, secrets linger, puzzles whispered through silence, enigmas between the lines. Some have looked at the figure seated to Christ's right, long hair flowing, face serene, body inclined toward him with almost tender grace. Is it John, the beloved disciple, often shown youthful and gentle? Or is it, as some modern imaginations claim, a woman, perhaps Mary Magdalene, seated beside Christ as his companion, her body forming a mirrored image with his? Their forms, when viewed together, shape a letter V, an opening, a symbol that some call sacred union, others coincidence. Leonardo himself never spoke of it, and so the question remains suspended, unresolved. Others see music hidden in the hands and bread. They trace the positions of fingers, the placement of loaves, and find a pattern that can be read as notes on a staff. Played aloud, it becomes a slow, solemn hymn, as though Leonardo composed not only with pigment but with silence and song. Is this accident or intention? No one can say for certain, yet the thought lingers like a chord held in the air. The geometry itself has drawn interpreters. Lines intersect, triangles emerge, proportions echo sacred numbers. Some claim the painting hides codes of faith or maps of celestial truth. Others believe Leonardo embedded riddles not to be solved, but to remind us that beauty itself is a mystery. To look upon the Last Supper is to enter a labyrinth, where certainty dissolves and questions multiply. And then there is the absence. For what Leonardo chose not to paint is as striking as what he did. There is no chalice, no gleaming holy grail set upon the table. Instead, the bread and wine are plain, scattered across simple dishes. To some, this is Leonardo stripping away the ornament to reveal the essence. To others, it is a hidden challenge, a riddle that invites us to seek the grail not in objects, but in the living moment. Even the eyes of Judas have stirred debate. Some see sorrow in them, others guilt, others defiance. Leonardo offers no clear judgment, only a man shrinking into shadow, yet still part of the table. Is this condemnation or mercy? Each viewer must decide for themselves. Across centuries, theories rise and fall, of Magdalene beside Christ, of coded music, of hidden numbers, of absent chalices. Some are fanciful, some scholarly, some dismissed as dreams. Yet all speak to the same truth. Leonardo painted a scene that refuses to be simple. He left space for mystery, room for us to wander among questions without end. And perhaps this is the greatest enigma of all. Not whether there is a secret code, but why we continue to search. For in searching, we become part of the painting, our own eyes and hands drawn into the eternal puzzle. Masterpiece in ruins. Resurrection in fragments. Great art often carries two stories. The first is its birth, in the hand of the creator. The second is its survival, in the hands of time. The Last Supper has lived both, and the second nearly erased the first. From the beginning, Leonardo's experiment betrayed him. Instead of the durable fresco technique, where pigment is bound to wet plaster, he chose to work upon dry plaster, mixing tempera with oil to achieve the delicacy he desired. The colors glowed at first, rich and alive, but the surface was fragile, unable to withstand damp air and shifting walls. Only a few decades after its completion, visitors wrote that it was already fading, already falling into ruin. The centuries were not kind. Humidity crept into the refectory walls, blurring faces into haze. Mold spread, paint crumbled, and hands once precise dissolved into shadows of themselves. Some restorers tried to save it, but their methods often harmed it further, painting over what remained, burying Leonardo's touch beneath layers of guesswork. By the time the 18th century dawned, much of the masterpiece was a ghost, more memory than image. And still, fate tested it further. In the late 18th century, when Napoleon's soldiers used the convent as a stable, they hurled stones at the walls, gouged the paint, and left the room in filth. Later, during the Second World War, bombs fell upon Milan, destroying much of the convent around the painting. For a time, only sandbags and scaffolding kept the Last Supper from vanishing into rubble. It was a miracle, fragile and probable, that the wall remained standing when all else collapsed. When at last the war was over, the painting still lingered in a state of ruin. Leonardo's supper seemed less like a feast of eternity and more like a faded dream. Faces were nearly gone, colors dimmed to dust, details drowned by centuries of damage. Yet the world refused to let it die. Restoration after restoration was attempted, some crude, some careful. But the most ambitious began in the late 20th century, when a team spent more than 20 years, slowly, delicately uncovering what fragments of Leonardo's hand still survived. With microscopes, scalpel blades, and infinite patience, they removed centuries of overpainting, revealing faint traces of original strokes, tiny fragments of color that had not yet vanished. Piece by piece, the painting was reborn, not as it once was, but as a delicate mosaic of ruin and resurrection. Today, when one stands before the Last Supper, it is not Leonardo's original vision in full glory. It is a survivor, part masterpiece, part ruin, a fragile harmony of what remains and what has been lost. And perhaps that makes it all the more moving. For in its scars, we see the centuries it has endured. In its fragments, we sense the devotion of those who refused to let it disappear. It is no longer merely a painting. It is a testament to survival, to the stubbornness of beauty against the cruelty of time, to the truth that even when the image fades, the story it holds continues to breathe. Eternal Supper of the Soul. To stand before the Last Supper today is to stand at the crossroads of time. 5 centuries have passed since Leonardo pressed his brush to the plaster of Santa Maria del Grazie. Empires have risen and fallen, wars have scorched the earth, and yet within that quiet refectory in Milan, Christ still spreads his hands, and the disciples still lean toward or away from him, caught in a single suspended breath. It is no longer just paint, no longer merely pigment upon wall. It is memory given form, silence given shape, a vision that holds within it the sorrow of betrayal, the tremor of doubt, the stillness of faith. It is the hour before darkness falls, yet also the promise that light will return. What moves us most is not perfection, for perfection has long since crumbled away. What moves us is its humanity. The way Thomas raises a finger, as though he cannot keep doubt from rising. The way Peter clutches a knife, his face burning with conflict. The way Judas recoils, money clenched in his hand, his body curling inward as though already carrying the weight of his deed. And Christ, serene yet sorrowful, caught between the breaking of bread and the breaking of trust. And then there is the emptiness at the center of the table, the space that almost seems to invite us in. For Leonardo did not paint a golden chalice, did not paint ornate dishes, did not fill the table with finery. Instead, he left a place for us. Bread scattered, wine poured, a space waiting. We too are called to sit there, to look into the faces of the disciples and find in them pieces of ourselves. Our doubts, our fears, our betrayals, our hopes. Through centuries, the Last Supper has become more than a scene from Scripture. It has become a mirror of the human heart, a reminder that greatness and frailty share the same table, that love and betrayal, faith and doubt, eternity and passing time all dwell side by side. And though the colors have faded, though fragments are missing, its power endures, perhaps even more so because of its fragility. For beauty that survives ruin becomes sacred in its endurance. And so this painting, half lost and half saved, lives on not only in Milan but in the imagination of all who dream before it. In the end, Leonardo gave us more than a supper. He gave us a vision of humanity poised between night and dawn, between despair and grace. A vision that does not end when we close our eyes, but lingers, like the taste of wine upon the tongue, like the warmth of bread held in the hand. It is, and will remain, an eternal supper of the soul. The ambassadors, anamorphosis of power and mortality, a portrait of triumph dressed in silks and instruments of knowledge, yet undone by a single warped skull that reveals the truth all eyes must face. painter of courts and crowns. In the heart of Renaissance Europe, where courts glittered with silk, gold, and ambition, there lived a painter whose brush seemed to carry both the world and its secrets. Hans Holbein the Younger was his name, born into the quiet town of Augsburg, yet destined for halls of power, where princes and diplomats would stand before him, and the gaze of his portraits would hold them for eternity. He came of a family of artists, his father a skilled painter and illuminator, yet Hans's mind reached further than borders or technique. His eyes saw not just faces but the currents beneath them, the ambitions, the fears, the subtle negotiations of posture and glance. By the early 16th century, Europe was a tapestry of rival states, city-states, and emergent empires, a continent on the cusp of modernity. The Reformation stirred in distant towns, merchants and nobles expanded their influence, and courts competed not only with armies but with art. Wealth was displayed in tapestries, jewels, and music, but power was immortalized in portraits. And in this climate, Holbein flourished. He was a painter who could convey not only the likeness of a man but the measure of his intellect, the weight of his station, and the precision of his mind. He traveled from Augsburg to Basel, where his works adorned private chambers and public halls alike. He mingled with scholars, humanists, and theologians, absorbing their texts and debates. He sketched the instruments of knowledge that define the age, globes and compasses, books of scripture and science, and stored them in his memory to transform into objects on canvas. His portraits were never mere decoration. They were statements of identity, intelligence, and occasionally subtle warning. By the time he arrived in England, invited by the court of Henry VIII, Holbein had already become known as a master of detail and observation. Yet it was in the courts of Europe's emerging powers, where diplomacy and art intertwined, that he truly refined his craft. Patrons came not only seeking likenesses, but a testament to their status, their influence, and their taste. In Holbein's brush, a merchant could become monumental, a scholar could seem illuminated by intellect, and a courtier could stand as if sculpted in paint. Imagine him in his studio, a room filled with sketches, pigments, and the quiet hum of distant streets. He measured proportions with meticulous care, studied the fall of light on fabric, and observed the subtlest gestures that betrayed pride or humility. Every line, every fold of a sleeve, every reflection in a polished surface was deliberate. For Holbein understood that painting was not merely to please the eye, but to capture the weight of a life, the pulse of a moment, the whispers of power itself. It was this mastery that would bring him to Paris, Basel, and eventually the courts of England, where kings and ambassadors would pose before him. Yet even as he painted the powerful, Holbein never allowed grandeur to mask reality. He recorded their jewels, their silks, their trappings of authority, but also the subtle intimations of mortality, the careful measure of human frailty. In every portrait, he balanced splendor with honesty, capturing not only what men wished to show but what the world would remember. And so, at the moment he turned to paint the ambassadors, Holbein was a man who had walked the corridors of power and the quiet streets of learning alike. His mind carried the knowledge of books, the precision of instruments, and the discipline of countless portraits. But now he was faced with a challenge unlike any other: to capture two men in a single frame, amidst a tableau of knowledge, faith, and power, while hinting, ever so subtly, at the fragility of life itself. In the eyes of Holbein, every court, every crown, and every gesture was a story. And it is in this story that we begin, stepping into the world of the ambassadors, where brilliance and mortality sit side by side on a painted stage. Commission of Diplomacy. The year was 1563, a time when diplomacy was as much theater as negotiation, and portraits were not merely decoration but statements of power. In the city of Paris, or perhaps Basel, records are careful to note the presence of Holbein among wealthy patrons, yet elusive on the exact moment the commission arrived. He received word that two prominent men of influence wished to be immortalized together. Jean de Dintiville, French ambassador to England, young, proud, and dressed in the finest silks, and Georges de Selve, Bishop of Lavore, erudite and contemplative, were to appear not separately but united, standing side by side. It was no ordinary request. Two men, distinct in station, personality, and purpose, were to be captured in a single composition that would display their wealth, their intellect, and their worldly knowledge. The painting was to adorn a hall of diplomacy, a place where guests would be reminded not only of the individuals before them but of the reach and sophistication of the French crown. Holbein understood immediately that this commission was more than a likeness. It was a statement, a visual manifesto of learning, influence, and human ambition. Imagine him sketching the first outlines, pencils and brushes poised, the two ambassadors sitting before him in heavy garments, sunlight streaming through tall windows, glinting off embroidered fabrics and the polished surfaces of instruments. Globes of the world, lute and sheet music, a hymnal and mathematical texts, all were to be incorporated, yet balanced so that neither man nor object overpowered the other. Every placement was deliberate, a choreography of status, intellect, and subtle hierarchy. Holbein worked carefully, aware that he was not merely documenting appearance, but negotiating history. Portraits were power, and power was fragile. A single misaligned gaze, a careless gesture, or a misjudged reflection could change the meaning entirely. And so he painted with patience, consulting instruments of perspective, measuring shadows, and adjusting folds in silk to reflect light perfectly. This was diplomacy rendered in paint. A meeting of minds and social standing captured on wood. The context of the commission itself is layered with intrigue. Europe was a continent of alliances and tensions, a chessboard of kingdoms maneuvering for advantage. France and England were entwined in politics, and these two men represented not only their individual ambitions but also the weight of nations. Holbein's canvas would become a silent witness to these tensions, a frozen testament to strategy and prestige. Yet the painting was more than politics. It was a study in mortality and the fleeting nature of life, though the ambassadors themselves would not have known this. Holbein, ever mindful of human impermanence, had already begun to plan the anamorphic skull at the painting's base, a secret reminder that no matter how grand or learned, all men must eventually face death. It would be invisible unless the viewer changed perspective, a hidden message that even power and knowledge could not escape the inevitable. And so, the commission was accepted, the sitters arranged, the objects meticulously chosen. Holbein's mind teemed with ideas, the balance of light and shadow, the play of geometry, the positioning of hands and eyes, the careful depiction of instruments of learning. He was not simply painting ambassadors, he was capturing a moment in history, a convergence of intellect, wealth, and the quiet inevitability of mortality. The canvas awaited, blank yet filled with possibility. Holbein's brush was poised to record not only likeness but legacy. And in that commission, the seeds of an artwork that would endure centuries, survive wars, and continue to mesmerize viewers for generations were sown. Two men, one moment. Step closer now. The painted panel fills the space before you, and at first glance, it is the meeting of two remarkable men. Jean de Dinteville stands tall, commanding in red silk trimmed with gold, his posture deliberate, his hand resting on a globe as though claiming dominion over knowledge and the wider world. Beside him, Georges de Selve is composed, scholarly, his robe simpler but no less distinguished, a subtle intellect radiating from his calm gaze. Both are caught in a frozen moment, yet alive with intent, as though Holbein has captured not merely their likeness but the precise measure of their character. The room they inhabit is carefully constructed, a stage for intellect and ambition. Shelves of books rise behind them, globes and instruments are placed at precise angles, a lute rests near the edge of the table, and scattered sheet music flutters as if caught in a momentary breath. Each object speaks, of scholarship, of music, of faith, of diplomacy, a collection of symbols that mark these men as learned, worldly, and aware of their influence. Notice the precision in their hands. Dinteville's fingers lightly touch the globe, an assertion of worldly knowledge, a nod to the power of exploration and empire. Selve's hands are poised, one resting lightly on a hymnal, the other at his side, conveying composure and intellect. Holbein has orchestrated their gestures with care, ensuring that even at rest, their bodies narrate authority, study, and restraint. The floor tiling, a geometric array of squares and diamonds, extends backward, guiding the eye deeper into the painting. Perspective is meticulous, giving the scene a sense of space that almost invites you to step inside, to walk among the instruments and books, to sit at the table and feel the weight of both knowledge and ambition. Light streams from the unseen windows, catching the folds of fabric, the sheen of polished wood, and the gleam of metal instruments, illuminating the figures without overwhelming them. At first glance, you may be struck by their wealth and stature. The silks, the intricate embroidery, the finery of buttons and clasps, all declare their prominence. Yet, lingering longer, your attention is drawn to subtler details. A crucifix barely visible behind the lute, the careful arrangement of books by subject, the slight tilt of the head hinting at reflection or caution. These men are not simply proud, they are aware, contemplative, measured. Each detail is intentional, and each tells a story of ambition tempered by thought. It is this first impression, this entrance into their world, that is so mesmerizing. Holbein does not merely show two men, he shows an intersection of intellect, diplomacy, and mortality, a moment suspended, rich with symbolism, and alive with the tension of knowledge and power. For all the splendor around them, there is a sense that these figures, though commanding, exist within the limits of human life, subject to time, circumstance, and the inevitable decay that shadows every triumph. And so you stand before them, the two men, one moment frozen for centuries. You see not only their faces, but their purpose, their education, their station. You see the markers of an age, a world of learning, exploration, and ambition, and you realize that Holbein's genius is not merely in likeness, but in capturing the soul of his sitters and the weight of their moment in history. Globes, lutes, and books of secrets. Now, let your eyes roam across the table and shelves, over the instruments and tomes Holbein so carefully arranged. Every object in this room is deliberate, a cipher of knowledge, status, and mortality. The terrestrial globe rests prominently near Dinteville's hand, polished wood reflecting light, its continents mapped with precision, a testament to the reach of empire, the curiosity of exploration, and the human desire to chart the unknown. Beside it, a celestial globe stands silent, adorned with constellations and stars, a reminder of the heavens and the divine order that governs both earth and man. Books line the shelves behind them, their spines detailed with gold lettering and carefully painted bindings. They speak of theology, philosophy, and science, of texts that informed the ambassador's education and their roles as men of influence. One can almost imagine them opening the pages, turning the fragile sheets, tracing the inked lines as if absorbing centuries of accumulated wisdom. The presence of knowledge here is deliberate. These men are defined not only by their appearance, but by their mastery of the world, of both matter and mind. Notice the lute, its polished curves resting lightly on the table, strings taut and silent. A chord missing, as if the music is interrupted, hinting at imperfection and mortality. It is a quiet symbol that even the most harmonious life contains discord, that beauty is fleeting, and that learning and art, while powerful, cannot suspend the inevitable passage of time. Holbein also places a hymnal carefully, angled toward the viewer, a subtle nod to faith and contemplation. The juxtaposition of music, literature, and science in a single scene signals the breadth of Renaissance learning, the ideal that a man could be versed in both sacred and secular knowledge, a scholar and diplomat in one. Yet within this abundance of learning lies a quiet tension, the awareness that all knowledge is temporary, all power limited, all life subject to decay. And then there are the details that are easy to miss at first glance. The precise alignment of objects on the table, the reflection of light on polished surfaces, the careful spatial relationships that create order amid abundance. Holbein's placement is not merely aesthetic, it is deliberate, guiding the eye and the mind to consider balance, hierarchy, and meaning. Every instrument, every book, every object carries a weight beyond itself, a story folded into its shape. Even as the ambassadors stand, commanding attention, it is these objects that speak quietly to the viewer, offering a deeper understanding of their world. The painting becomes a repository of knowledge, a museum within a frame, where each artifact tells a tale of learning, ambition, and human ingenuity. And yet, amid all this grandeur, the painting contains a hidden truth, a secret that will only reveal itself from a specific vantage, reminding us that no matter how much we accumulate or achieve, mortality remains inescapable. This is the magic of Holbein's design. The objects are not mere decoration, but conduits for thought. They invite us to linger, to examine, to understand that power and knowledge are beautiful, but never absolute. That every globe, lute, and book carries with it a shadow of impermanence, and that within the quiet meticulousness of the scene, life and death converse in painted form. Craft of perspective. Step closer and notice how the room itself seems to extend beyond the painted frame. Holbein's genius is not only in likeness, but in creating a space that feels real, almost tangible. The floor tiles stretch backward in perfect alignment, guiding the eye toward the center, while the arrangement of shelves, instruments, and table objects forms a carefully measured grid. Every line, every angle, every placement is calculated, a silent architecture that holds the figures in balance, framing their presence with both grandeur and precision. Perspective here is not simply a technique, it is a narrative device. The placement of the objects, the spacing between the two men, the height of the shelves, the angles of the globes, all serve to draw the viewer's gaze, to orchestrate attention, and to hint at relationships between knowledge, power, and mortality. Holbein's eye measured more than physical space. He measured influence, intellect, and subtle hierarchies. And then there is the anamorphic skull, the marvel that has fascinated viewers for centuries. At first glance, it is a strange, distorted shape sprawled across the lower foreground. But from the side, from a sharp angle, the grotesque form resolves into a human skull, a memento mori hidden in plain sight. Its very distortion demands effort, forcing the viewer to shift perspective, to consider not only the figures before them but the inevitability that shadows all human ambition. It is both a technical triumph and a philosophical one, a reminder that knowledge, wealth, and influence cannot escape the reach of mortality. The skull is integrated into the composition with meticulous care. Its angle aligns with the lines of the floor and the table, subtly connected to the instruments and books, yet deliberately hidden until discovered. Holbein challenges the viewer. To see fully, one must change one's position. Just as in life, full understanding requires attention, reflection, and sometimes a shift in perception. Beyond the skull, Holbein's brushwork reveals mastery in rendering texture and material. Silk glows with sheen, wood shines with polish, metal gleams with quiet authority, and parchment captures the crispness of scholarly knowledge. Light falls with perfect realism, casting subtle highlights that give depth and dimension, so that the figures occupy a believable yet elevated space. Even the smallest details, a fold in a sleeve, the curve of a lute, the delicate engraving on a globe, demonstrate Holbein's relentless observation and skill. Perspective is not merely visual, it is philosophical. The careful arrangement of objects, the illusion of space, and the hidden skull together create a painting that is more than a portrait. It is a meditation on knowledge, power, and the fragility of life. To step back, to take in the scene as a whole, is to witness not only two men of prominence, but the intricate weave of intellect, ambition, and impermanence that surrounds them. Holbein's craft elevates the work from representation to revelation. It is a painting that instructs the eye, the mind, and the soul. Perspective guides not only vision but understanding, and hidden within it lies the truth that even the grandest achievements are fleeting, and that mortality, subtle yet absolute, hovers over all. The skewed skull. Look lower now toward the edge of the table, and you will see it, a shape that, at first glance, seems like an abstract blot or a strange distortion. Only when you shift your perspective, crouch, or move to the side, does it reveal itself fully, a human skull, elongated and warped by Holbein's genius. It is a secret within the painting, a hidden truth that demands effort to perceive, a reminder that no matter how wealth, knowledge, or power is displayed, mortality cannot be avoided. This anamorphic skull is more than a trick of the eye. It is a silent, chilling commentary on the world above it. The two ambassadors stand adorned in finery, surrounded by instruments of learning, music, and faith, their presence commanding the scene. Yet beneath their polished shoes, at the very foot of the tableau, death waits, distorted but inevitable. Holbein reminds us that time spares no one, that the proudest man, the cleverest scholar, the most influential diplomat, will one day be reduced to this simple, undeniable shape. Scholars and dreamers alike have speculated on why Holbein included this secret. Was it a warning for the men themselves, a meditation for the viewer, or both? Perhaps it was a quiet assertion that human ambition is temporary, that learning and diplomacy, however grand, exist within a finite life. The skull is both hidden and unavoidable, a paradoxical presence that defines the work as much as the figures above. Even the technique is astonishing. The distorted form could only resolve from a sharp angle. It was designed to confound the casual observer. Holbein calculated every line, every curve, every proportional twist. It is a demonstration not only of technical mastery but of deep understanding of human perception, how we see, how we interpret, and how truth sometimes requires effort to reveal itself. The skull also interacts with the other objects in the scene. Its line aligns with the edge of the table, the floor's geometric pattern, and even the placement of the lute and globes. It is integrated, not separate, reminding the viewer that mortality is woven into every aspect of life: knowledge, wealth, faith, music, and art. Nothing escapes it. To linger on the skull is to feel a subtle shift in the mood of the painting. What seemed a celebration of intellect and status becomes also a meditation on impermanence. The vibrancy of the silks, the precision of the instruments, the poise of the ambassadors, all exist in contrast with the hidden certainty beneath them. It is a visual paradox, life and death, triumph and decay, hidden in plain sight. Holbein's Memento Mori transforms the portrait from a static image to a living reflection. It challenges the viewer to look closer, to question assumptions, and to recognize that beauty, power, and knowledge, however dazzling, are fleeting. In the end, it is not only a portrait of two men, it is a lesson on the fragility of all human endeavor, written in paint, geometry, and the most subtle of illusions. Diplomats in transit. After Holbein's brush had traced every line, every gleaming fold of silk, and every meticulously rendered object, the painting's life did not end in the studio. Instead, it began a journey almost as intricate as the composition itself, carried across time, through courts, and into the hands of those who valued power, prestige, and art. Initially, it adorned the private hole of Jean de Dinteville, one of the ambassadors immortalized within it, a symbol of his learning and influence. Perhaps it was viewed by visiting dignitaries, envoys, or scholars, who paused to study not only the two men but the instruments, books, and hidden messages Holbein had embedded. The portrait became more than a likeness. It became a testament to knowledge, diplomacy, and subtle warning. Over the centuries, the painting traveled quietly through the corridors of European nobility. It survived wars, revolutions, and changing tastes in art. At times it was threatened, nearly lost in the upheavals that swept across France, Germany, and England, yet somehow against all odds it endured. Unlike the wealth or power displayed within it, which could vanish overnight, the painted ambassadors persisted, witnesses to the shifting sands of history. Collectors, scholars, and admirers all played roles in its survival. Some safeguarded it carefully, preserving both the figures and the hidden skull. Others merely admired it from afar, unaware of the subtle genius within. Each transfer, each movement, was a small act of preservation, a recognition that Holbein's work contained more than decoration. It carried knowledge, reflection, and the weight of mortality itself. Even the physical condition of the painting became part of its journey. The wood panel aged, pigments shifted, and varnish yellowed with time. Each layer of history added character, transforming it into a relic of both artistic brilliance and human impermanence. The ambassadors, once vivid and commanding, now seemed slightly removed, their presence softened by centuries, yet no less compelling. And through it all, the hidden skull remained, waiting for the attentive eye, a secret passing silently from observer to observer. The painting's journey became a story not only of two men and their world, but of the endurance of art, of knowledge, and of ideas across generations. Each place it rested, each hand that handled it, contributed to the unfolding narrative of survival, of meaning preserved, of human ingenuity acknowledged. Today, the painting rests in a museum, viewed by countless eyes, studied by scholars, and admired by all who step close enough to perceive its depth. Yet even in this final resting place, it is more than an object behind glass. It remains a traveling lesson, a reminder of the fragility of life and the resilience of thought, a bridge between the ambitions of its sitters and the contemplation of every viewer who meets them centuries later. The diplomats have not moved from their frame, but they continue their journey through time, through interpretation, through perception. And as long as there are eyes willing to see and minds willing to think, the painting will travel still, teaching, warning, and inspiring. Lesson of Mortality. Stand now before Holbein's masterpiece and let the full scene sink in. The ambassadors remain poised, their garments rich, their expressions measured, the objects around them meticulously placed. Yet above all, the hidden skull anchors the painting with quiet inevitability. It is a reminder that no matter how learned, how wealthy, how powerful, all must one day confront the same truth. The work invites contemplation, urging us to linger on the tension between knowledge and impermanence. Every globe, book, lute, and instrument represents human endeavor, our curiosity, our ambition, our mastery over the world. And yet, juxtaposed with the subtle presence of mortality, these achievements are both celebrated and humbled. Holbein's genius is in this delicate balance, a visual harmony that teaches without preaching, that warns without despairing. Notice how the figures remain undisturbed by the silent reminder at their feet. The ambassadors, embodiments of status and intellect, do not turn, do not flinch. Holbein captures not just their appearance but their poise, their composure, their awareness of duty and destiny. The skull is not meant to frighten, but to deepen the understanding of life's fleeting nature. It asks the viewer to reconcile splendor with impermanence, ambition with humility. Even centuries later, the painting speaks with clarity. Scholars debate, students study, and visitors marvel, yet the lesson remains immediate, visceral. Life is measured not only by what we accumulate or achieve, but by how we acknowledge our limits and the inevitability of change. Holbein's work becomes a meditation on time, mortality, and the quiet, unyielding truth that underpins every human pursuit. As you step back, the room, the ambassadors, and their treasures merge into a tableau that is both grand and intimate. The painting whispers a truth across centuries, that wisdom and learning are precious, that beauty and power are alluring, but that all is bound to the delicate thread of human life. The skull, hidden yet present, ensures that the viewer remembers this with every careful glance, every lingering observation. And so the ambassadors endures not merely as a portrait, but as a dialogue between the living and the inevitable. It is an artwork that transcends time, teaching through beauty, composition, and hidden truths. The ambassadors may forever stand, the instruments may forever rest, the books may forever await the eye that studies them. Yet their story is inseparable from the lesson woven into the frame. Life, however brilliant, is finite, and mortality is the ultimate teacher. In this quiet reflection, the painting fulfills its purpose. It is both tribute and admonition, a celebration of human intellect and ambition, and a meditation on the fragility that accompanies it. And as you leave its presence, you carry with you the subtle weight of its lesson, the reminder that in knowledge, in power, in every endeavor, the shadow of mortality shapes everything.